Hello, I'm Nancy Novograd, and as a relatively new resident of Charleston, I'm thrilled to be here with you today at the same event that last year made my husband John and I know that we had come to the right place. I am delighted to have the opportunity to introduce André Aciman and Edoardo Ballerini for their conversation about André's new book, Roman Year. Long before he became a global sensation as the author of Call Me By My Name, followed by Luca Guadagnino's film adaptation, André rated high in my pantheon of writers I love. This was for his first memoir, Out of Egypt, detailing his family's expulsion from the country of his birth in 1965. The author of 3 novels, André is also widely published as a writer of articles and reviews in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and elsewhere. He holds a PhD in comparative literature from Harvard and is a distinguished professor of comparative literature at CUNY, the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, where he serves as director of the Writers' Institute. Edoardo Ballerini began his life after graduation from Wesleyan as a film and TV actor. A few people in this audience may remember him from episodes of The Sopranos. He came to the ever more important publishing genre of audio narration almost by chance over a decade ago, when a producer asked whether he would be interested in recording a book. Since then, he has narrated more than 500 audiobooks, from the popular to the literary, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, Albert Camus' essays. He and his work have won countless awards and recognition, including in a feature article in the New York Times Magazine. He has been said to make an author's words come alive and sing. Edoardo has also recorded Out of Egypt and finds André's writing compatible with his own sensibilities. He says André's words flow through him naturally. Finally, on behalf of the Charleston Literary Festival, I would like to thank Lee Bell and Foti Pantatsis for their sponsorship of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you all, and thank you, André. And I meant what I said, that your words do flow through me in a way that does not always happen with all writers.
But I have to interrupt you for a second.
Already?
Yes, it's going to be that way.
But I had, okay, yeah.
No, basically, when I heard Edoardo reading from one of my books, Homo Irrealis, I felt that his reading was so superb that I said, for a moment, it happened to me, my God, that's a great writer. And I said, wait a second, this is me. I can't say that, but anyway.
Well, now that you've thoroughly embarrassed me, let's move on to your book.
Okay, fine.
So the title is Roman Year, which would suggest that there was a year spent in Rome. There's also a lot of Paris
Yes.
in this book. But assuming people have not read it because it's a fairly new publication, what happens in this Roman year? Can you set up?
Yes, sure. Essentially, we've been kicked out of Egypt. My whole family has been kicked out, but my father is still there and probably held. We arrive, my mother is completely deaf, so she doesn't know Italian. My younger brother is kind of on his own, he's doing his own thing, is not worried, and I am essentially the person who's going to be the spokesman for quite a while. We arrive in Italy, we're penniless, literally penniless. I cannot tell you. This is not a figure of speech. We have no money. And we don't even know how to count the money that end up when they give us change. But we're sort of lost in Naples. An uncle comes to pick us up from Naples and drives us straight to New York. Bad. No, he drives us to Rome, where he has an apartment that he leases to us. And essentially, we arrive penniless. We are in Rome, and it's not the Rome that I had expected in my dreams of the street names suggesting whatever it was. So suddenly we are Romans, but we're not really. We're Italians, but hardly, because my father had purchased the citizenship of Italy, because otherwise we would have been stateless and therefore subject to being kicked out right away from Egypt. And my father didn't want to be kicked out. Eventually we were kicked out. Expelled is the correct term. And suddenly we are on our own. And it is a terrible moment in my life, and I think in my parents' life as well.
And this year was obviously transformative.
Yes.
I mentioned that this book resonated with me in particular, not to dwell on my story too much, but I spent a summer in Rome, which I've told you about, which was absolutely transformative to my life.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we shared in our experiences was this sense of loss, and in your case, a sense of grief,
yes,
as you put it. And I just want to read a very short passage to set this up. I'm just going to lean back and sort of relax. What I felt at that moment was not sorrow, not even anger at my uncle. What I felt was the persistent, undefinable numbness that eventually overtakes you and won't let go. You feel nothing because there's nothing to feel. The pain is still working itself out, has yet to come, will come, just never when you expect. I tried to feel grief instead. Grief was easier because it was factual and thinkable. Grief for what was lost, for who we'd been and had left behind. Grief for old habits that were meant to die but hadn't yet. Grief for my father, who was still in Egypt and might be arrested on who knows what trumped-up charges before even being allowed to rejoin us. Grief for my deaf mother, who knew not a word of Italian and was as broken and rudderless as my brother and I. I felt like a child who had strayed from his mother's grip and was now stranded and helpless in a huge department store that was about to close for the day, except that I knew Italian and my mother did not, and I was the grown-up and she the child. Now, I thought this was extraordinary because you, as a very young man, you're how old? 16?
16, yeah.
16, right. But still very young, and had to take on this extraordinary responsibility. Right. So how did this change you? How did this year change you?
Well, you have to grow up very fast.
Yeah.
But you don't grow up in the way that people tell you that I grew up. You take all kind of biases and sort of weird turns in order to become what is known as a grown-up. Nobody grows up. So my way of doing that was to essentially resist Rome altogether. And I shut myself up in a room that was intentionally kept dark because I would close the shutters so as not to even look outside, and I would read about other places, particularly France in the 19th century, and of course Russia in the 19th century. I think I read all the Russian novels that were translated in English, and I would read in French, in Italian, and in English. But it was a solitary way, and suddenly, occasionally, I would become a child again because I was still a child, and my mother was the leader, and she would lose her temper every 2 minutes because things did not work her way. On the other hand, I was the one who negotiated, who made the phone calls to all kinds of offices where basically somebody had to speak Italian relatively correctly so as to get what we needed. And what we needed to get, for example, papers for us. And my mother had no idea what kind of papers, but I knew there were papers that had to be gotten. And so I had to make all kinds of attempts to apply for the papers. And then you had to go to all kinds of offices because Italians are sort of added difficulty in everything. They become totally
Italian
totally,
bureaucracy is as bad as it's been
yeah,
described
they're
as.
bureaucrats to the nth degree.
Right.
So you have to wait outside an office where somebody's having a personal conversation, and you can overhear he's telling what's going on to his mistress or his wife. Basically, everything was wrong. And so I had to teach my mother how to be patient, at least when you're dealing with other people.
Now, you say, you were a child and you were very young, you were 16. And one of the things that always strikes me with memoir is that, of course, you're talking about events in the past.
Right.
So these, were a few decades ago. And my question is always, like, how well does one remember these events? And how much has to be filled in through the filter of memory?
The filter of memory, as you all know, is very unreliable. It basically asks you to lie. So you have to remember, and I always say this, you put a comma in the wrong place, it changes your life. If you know how a comma does things that are sort of mendacious, fundamentally. So, in essence, you do not remember, you excavate, which is another way of remembering. As you're writing, you're not dealing with Rome as you remember it, you're dealing Rome as you're creating a narrative for yourself. You're not inventing facts, you're just putting them together in a different way so that you have a cohesive narrative.
Right.
And that's what you want. So, but in order to do that, you don't remember everything, you cannot. So you have to recall bit by bit by bit by basically straying into a little hovel, which is called your study. And you have the computer in front of you, because I write on a computer, and you have to say, okay, what is it that I remember? So occasionally I don't remember something, I'll call my brother. And he says, why do you want to remember this? I said, because I need to remember. I don't remember. And that's the end of it, because he doesn't care, and he doesn't want to remember, or whatever it is, whereas I need to remember. So this entering into your private self allows you to bring out things that nobody can remember unless you have to.
So this is a very interesting point, because you talk about the private self.
Yes.
The nature of a memoir, of course, is to share this privacy.
Yes.
And so I often ask myself with memoirs, I don't consider you a memoirist, but this is a memoir. Is there a level of discomfort with sharing some of these things? Is there a level at which you're allowing yourself to be so vulnerable that it feels,
Well, you have to be vulnerable,
right,
because otherwise you're literally writing for other people. And you have to behave for other people. And that's the last thing, for those of you who know my work, that's the last thing I want to do, is to behave, because I want to misbehave, okay? That is my signature. But essentially, you have to be candid and honest. You have to be. Otherwise, you're writing for other people, and you're writing your typical memoir. I was born in such and such a year, I was this and that, and we got expelled, etc., etc. What you want to do instead is you want to not only excavate, as I said, but you also want to create a narrative that is almost reads like a novel, not like a memoir. Right. And so for me to remember this, I have to keep in mind that I'm going to be telling you things that you may not want to know, that my sons, who are my first readers, tell me, why on earth are you writing this? Well, it happened that way. Yes, but they don't need to know. It's going to get you in trouble. Right. I said, that's exactly what I want. Well, you do what you want. And one of my sons is a publicist for Google, so they don't mess around. He said, you're going to get canceled. I said, well, okay, if that's the price one pays, that's what one pays.
So, but there is a level, to go back to your earlier point of memory and having to excavate,
yes,
and there is a level at which you're filling in these blanks with what you sort of think is thematically appropriate, yes, to tell in that. And I wonder also that because you write novels which are characters which are completely invented,
Yes.
how much of yourself is in the characters in the novels?
In the novels, well, in some characters, for those of you who've read Call Me By Your Name or seen the movie, you know that I do not understand a guy like Oliver. That is somebody who's totally impenetrable to my mind, to my imagination. But when it comes to Elio, all his insecurities, his diffidence vis-a-vis life, his worries, his unrelenting sort of reluctance with everything is me. That's who I am. That's how I feel. That's how I know the world.
And do you find yourself putting yourself into the other characters in your family? And I ask this because the characters in your family they're quite extraordinary characters. Uncle Claude, comes to mind, and
yes.
your mother, certainly. And do you find yourself, because it's your story, using these characters, you're trying to be faithful to who they were
yes.
in their lives, but also imbuing them with some characteristics of your own?
If I feel them, but for example, Uncle Claude, who is a notoriously bad character.
Is a fantastic character. I know there's a real person, but truly a memorable character. He deserves his own book, I
Yes,
think.
he does. And he's a wonderful, but basically I know that when on the first day I told my brother, I'm going to spit on his grave. Because that's how badly it went. And so he made me hate Rome. For many, a long time, I hated Rome because of him. How did we get into this? Claude, a character.
Characters, yeah.
Now, essentially, sorry, I mean, you lose track of things. The way it works is that he's horrible, he's sort of, I hate him, blah, blah, blah. And then one day he comes to our house, and he's been mean to us all the time. And especially to my mother, who's deaf. And he would say something like, "You're a deaf woman, couldn't you help me with the traffic? Well, what are you, that stupid?" I mean, things that were horrible to hear. Then one day he comes to our house, and my mother had just cooked baked artichokes, which are, of course, a very difficult plate to cook because you ruin your hands in the process. And she asked him, you should try one. I've just made them today. He said, "I don't want to try your stupid things." And so he says, "You just try it. You may hate it, or you may not." So he's eating it, and he's tasting it, and he's about to spit it out because I could tell he's going to spit it up. Instead, he starts weeping because it reminds him of his mother's cooking. In fact, no accident, because my mother learned the recipe from her mother-in-law, who was the daughter of his mother. So in essence, this passed out. So suddenly, here you have a mean person that I'm going to spit on his grave, and at the same time, he's humanized because he's weeping. Right. And he's weeping what for? For his mother, who's been dead. She died at the age of 106. So that, if you don't resolve your issues with your mother by that time...
So there's a certain sympathy with the antagonistic character.
So I basically find out that he's really not such a bad person after all.
Right. Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts also on why I think that the memoir as a genre has really grown in popularity in the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Sure.
And if you see some reasons for that, or some trends in writing and why we may have gotten to this place?
I think that the memoirs tell you things that normal fiction is not capable of telling you. Normal fiction, if it's going to be about murder and maiming and whatever, it's going to be upfront about it. Whereas in memoir, it tells you the same story, but with a degree of reluctance that sort of absolves it of the horror that it comes with. And I think that memoir also happens to today. A memoir is not just a memoir. It wants to keep your attention, so it's telling you things that are private but not disgusting. And that's a very hard calibration to perform, because you can be private and disgusting, which I have been too, okay?
That's the next book, right? I wonder if the trend is sort of following a general societal trend of this sort of idea that we all want to put ourselves on view.
Well, you want to put yourself on view, but as long as you're not sick.
Right.
Okay, but there are a lot of, as you probably know, there are a lot of self-help books that come as memoirs, you know, the art of getting over a particular death of somebody, the art of getting over who you are, the art of whatever. There's all kinds of memoirs to that effect.
Is that an actual book, The Art of Getting Over Who You Are? Because I think that's a fantastic title. If it's not,
Well,
somebody should take that.
Getting over who you are, I think that's why memoirs are written.
Oh.
Because you're trying to resolve who you are, and of course, if you're honest, you know that there is no resolution, there's no closure to who you are.
Right.
You will always be questioning what you are. But I think the memoir genre becomes popular because it is also about intimacy.
And an intimacy, a level of intimacy that can't be reached in fiction.
And cannot reach it in fiction. And
Right.
so you're either intimate with yourself, finally sort of opening up to the public, or you're intimate with people that you didn't know you could be intimate with.
Oh.
And so it allows you to have that luxury, which I think fiction cannot.
Interesting. Speaking of intimacy, one of the great characters in this book is the city of Rome itself. And you have quite an intimate relationship with the city, and it really informs, and it's this sort of overbearing city, and at times, you know, very unfriendly to you, beyond the bureaucracy. But
Beyond the bureaucracy,
Yeah.
you never get over the bureaucracy
Right.
because you have to take buses
Right.
to get to that particular bureaucrat. But there are two different Romes. One of them was the one that you read about because it's about Via Turno, Via Eurialo, Via, what is it, the other one? Ours was Via Clelia, but there's also Villa Camilla and Villa Enea. All these are names taken from Virgil. So I was imagining that I would arrive at a place that basically represented Virgil. And of course, it was the most popular neighborhood in Rome. It was basically very, very, it wasn't poor, but it was, there were people who were all working, but there was a marketplace on the street that I lived in. So you would hear the hammering of the stalls being built up during the day, in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then being taken down at around 6 or 5 or 6. So this was one Rome, and I didn't like it. But then there's the other Rome, the Rome where I would walk to go to one bookstore, to another bookstore, to yet another bookstore. They were all English language bookstores, which were an anomaly back then. Today they don't exist anymore, or at least some bookstores would have some English language books. But by and large, for me, walking from one book to another bookstore what allowed me to understand Rome, to get to know a particular Rome that I loved, and I still love it. It is the Renaissance and the Baroque Rome of the new churches, but they were built in the 16 and the 1500s. And that is the Rome that I got to, like the narrow streets that were always paved with cobblestones. That was my beloved Rome, not where I lived. And it is through this that I got to understand who Rome really is.
because Rome obviously is a very world-famous city. Everybody has ideas of it,
Yeah.
the images of it, you know, the Vatican and all these extraordinary structures. The Rome that you're in is a very different Rome,
Yes.
which was exactly my experience too. I thought I was going to be walking down marble halls with all these, you know, extraordinary things. I was living in a sort of garage and walking down little streets. But you have since returned to Rome.
I have returned to Rome, and I've written many, many essays about Rome.
Right.
And to the point where I said, you know, I have to do something with that. But one of the things that I didn't want to do in my many essays about Rome, by the way, just to interrupt myself if I may,
You may.
No, because I wrote about a Rome that I knew, which is the Rome of the bookstores and the Rome of, the Spanish Steps, abutting this and abutting that and so on. But it was also a personal Rome. And so it becomes my Rome.
Right.
And everybody who reads my pieces would say, oh, that's my Rome too. I said, no, you don't understand. It can't have been your Rome, because my Rome was it was basically a place of discovery, of trying to portray or to project Nevsky Prospect, which is the street in St. Petersburg that I was reading about all the time. I was projecting it on Rome itself. So I was never seeing Rome itself. I was seeing some kind of concocted Rome. And when I went to Paris and I saw the leopard, I came back to Rome and said, oh my God, this reminds me of the movie The Leopard. And so suddenly I wasn't seeing Rome for Rome's sake. I was seeing a Rome with the leopard projected on it, which is Sicilian, okay?
Right.
So, but all this is just to tell you about my experience in Rome as an unreliable place. I'm an unreliable narrator of Rome.
But you do an extraordinary job of having this city stand in for this character that informs the young André, which made me think, are there other books, this is very much of a coming-of-age story, what is the German term, the Bildungsroman?
Yes, that's correct.
My Wesleyan education is finally paying off. Are there others in this genre that, not necessarily memoir, but in the Bildungsroman that...
No, I didn't read memoirs. I would read novels.
Right.
And just to discover who I was.
Right.
But I did read also this Krafft Ebing's book. I don't know how many of you have read Krafft. Do not admit that you've read it, okay? But it's a book on, I think it's called Psychopathia Sexualis. So I would read about every conceivable perversion. They used to call them perversions or deviancy at the time, and I had them all, okay? Well, it's like reading, it's like reading the Zodiac. Oh, that's me. Oh, it's the wrong sign. Okay, that's me too.
Right.
So I had every disease, every perversion. I had them all. I basically nurtured everything in me because I didn't know who I was, and I'll never know who I was.
But are there other examples of sort of stories of young men that
yes,
you
there
point
is.
to?
The one that I loved a lot was The Red and the Black, which I read once in Rome. Stendhal, yes.
Yeah.
And then I read it again in Rome again. And I would read A Hero of Our Time, which was very Stendhalian before its time by what's his name, Lermontov. And all these books were just part of my life. Yeah. And of course I read the poets, and I loved Alfred Noyes. I bet you don't know who Alfred Noyes is, but you do know who John Keats is, right?
What a perfect setup. That's extraordinary. I wanted to read a passage about, So just to set this up, there's a cemetery that you visit,
yes,
where Keats is buried. What mattered to me now was not just being here with Keats, but also lingering under the serene and tranquil air that hovered over the cemetery once you got inside. I asked the guard to watch my bike. He refused. I begged him and said that I was leaving the country and didn't know when I'd be back, and made a point of telling him about John Keats's grave and what it meant to me. I was only going to be there for a few minutes, I said. Keats was my favorite poet. He had no idea who Keats was, or why he should matter so much. All right then, but only for 5 minutes, not more. I'll need to pee by then, he said, smiling, adding one word only. Youth, he harumphed, and let me in with the bike. I leaned the bike against his cot and hastened to Keats's grave. What would I say to John Keats? I had no idea. It occurred to me that what really mattered was not being with John Keats or with anyone else buried in the cemetery. I wanted to be alone, but needed the shadow of someone else, as if by having Keats there, I had found a reason to stay still, stop time, and without knowing it, think about me, just me. I was saying goodbye, but not to Keats, or not to Keats only, but to Rome, and through Rome, to who I'd been in the city. Time changes us, but places change us too. And I thought that was an extraordinary passage from this book. Time changes us, of course. We grow up, we go through different phases. But where we are matters so much.
Yes, it does.
And so, who did you become right after?
Oh, you want me to give you his address?
Well, yeah.
No, it's just, I don't know who I became, but I know that I was, before I leave Rome to go to the United States, I am writing an application for school with my aunt, who is a German lady by heritage. She's Germanic, and she was born in Berlin. And she said to me, she said, what do you want to become? What do you want to do? What do you want to study? I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. She says, you have to know. And she says, you have to think like an American.
Right, because one of the sort of themes of this is getting to America,
Yes.
right? It's like this idea that that's the promised land.
That's the promised land.
Right.
And then she said something to me which, of course, still moves me and gives me the shivers still now. She said, do you think I want you to leave? Do you think I want you to go away from me and never see you again, or see you every 5 years, which, as it turned out, was in fact correct? And then she said something else which moved me terribly. They'll change you there. You'll become somebody else, which is an answer to your question.
Yeah.
I don't know who I became, but I know that I did change, and I did become more distant. I became more American as far as she was concerned. That the degree of intimacy that we had was never to be reproduced again.
Right.
And so that was dissolved through time.
And this question of identity, who are we? You know, you obviously have this very complicated and complex background of countries and languages. And what I found extraordinary about the book, Roman Year, is that it's really this struggle to understand ourselves as individuals.
Yes.
Right? And what I like in this book, and also in what I consider the better memoirs, is that it's not just somebody saying, I was born here, and then we moved here, and then I got a bicycle, and so on and so forth, but that it thematically feels like your own, by you I mean the reader or the listener, right? It becomes your own life, which is an extraordinary gift, and is not always pulled off in these.
Well, it's hard to pull off, and one of the things that I tell people is that, and they will say, they will agree with me, I've said nothing in my book that is new to you. And I think, yes, I was in Rome, I was born Jewish, I didn't like being Jewish, I didn't want to have any religion, I didn't have a religion, I didn't have a nationality, I couldn't care less about what flag represented me. For me, it was a piece of cloth. But by and large, I was basically projecting myself into something that is universal. So when I tell people that I say nothing new, what I really mean is there is nothing in my history, my whole biography, which is there, that is new to you. What I really mean is it sounds new because you never thought about it. You never considered it. But by and large, we all went through the same thing. Right. And to give a better example, for those of you who have had the privilege of going back to your, to your home room in second grade or first grade, if you've had the privilege of doing that, you know very well what I'm talking about. You have been, for the rest of your life, you've been exiled from your own homeroom. And you've been aching to return to it. Of course, you're not going to go back. You're going to visit for a few minutes and then say, yeah, I was here. That chair hasn't moved since the day one, since the day I used it, and I was that small. But by and large, it is the story of everybody. And that's why when I go into details that may seem a bit sordid to some people, my first sexual experience, immediately followed by my second one, because the first one was a total flop. Because I'm very honest, as you can see. Basically, yes, sexuality does change us, but not significantly. We're still the same person afterwards.
That homeroom, when you go back to visit, always seems so small.
Yes.
Right? And the hallways seem so narrow somehow. I know we want to get to people's questions shortly, but there's one thing I did want to ask you about, and this may be a little sort of nuts and bolts literary, but it fascinated me, and when you read the book, you'll see what I'm talking about. So you have characters speaking dialogue in the traditional, either quotation marks and then the line and comma, he said, quotation marks, line, comma, she said, and so on. And then it switches into their dialogue, but it becomes inside the head of the narrator.
Right.
And I was, as the person who was tasked with recording the book, I was fascinated by this. I was like, well, what's the difference between this dialogue and this dialogue? And one really just follows the other. So I know it's a little sort of nuts and bolts, geeky literary, but I really wanted to ask you about this.
Yes, it's a good question. The reason why I do that is because I don't like, as you probably know this by now, I'm not really good at plot. And I'm not really good.
I don't agree with that, but okay, go on. Yeah.
But I don't like too much dialogue, basically because my mother used to say, when I used to ask her to read a book or to look at a book, there's too much dialogue. It's like a play, and so she taught me not to like too much dialogue. And so what I do, however, is since the dialogue matters to me, it is more how I understood what you said, what I sort of, I don't pretend, but I give words to what I think you meant. And so I would do it in my head. So it becomes more personal, and it avoids the breaks that you have in he said, she said, he said, she said. It's more like something that occurs to me personally. And I like that avoidance of the breaks that you have when you have a he said. It all becomes internalized. If I could, I would do it all like that.
All right. Well, you could, I suppose. Did you keep journals during this time?
Never. No.
And did you write about this time shortly after, or when did you start writing about this time?
No, I started writing about 20 years later.
20 years later.
Yeah, so I was writing a lot of travel pieces.
Right.
Oh, Andre goes to Rome. Andre goes to this. Andre does that.
These sounds like children's book. Andre goes to Rome. Andre goes to the dentist, right?
You don't want me to go
No,
to the dentist. But it is true that I did a lot of Rome. And one of the things that, maybe this is a good moment to say this, is that I wrote a lot about Rome, but the one thing I didn't do was tell you how poor we were. It was inferred if it was there, but it was not something that I implied in my writing. So that I said, but most of my experience in Rome is because I was poor. I was only allowed to buy one book a week, and God forbid it was a short book and I read it too fast, because it cost like 75 cents. That's what the price of the books were at the time. And they were all paperbacks, and I took them with me, and now they're sort of rotting in my bookcase, but I can't part with them. The question is that there was just too much stuff going on that I didn't want to tell you how poor we were, so I had to camouflage it. And when I wrote this book, I said, no, this time I'm going to give you the Rome that I knew, the one that I aspired to also, but the one I knew. Of course, nowadays I'm lucky because people send me there and they invite me to go to Rome, and they put me up in good hotels, and I enjoy it tremendously, and I like that. And what do? I don't go back to Via Clelia, which is...
Have you not been back?
I have been back a few times, and I went with one of my sons who took pictures for me because I couldn't even bring myself to do anything. And when I went back to Via Clelia, I was expecting some kind of epiphany, some kind of feeling with whatever, and I felt nothing. I felt like exactly as you feel when you go to visit your homeroom. You feel something, but then it goes away, and you say, my God, I was a child in this place. I hated it. I couldn't wait to leave. Thank God I left.
And are there other, did you talk to other members of your family about this time? The ones
Yes.
that would have known?
The ones that did know, there were few alive. In fact, Out of Egypt is dedicated to about many people.
Right.
Most of them are dead.
Right.
A lot of it is me remembering exactly what happened.
Right. The poverty certainly comes
Yeah.
through quite,
Yeah.
well in the book. So Out of Egypt, Roman year.
Yeah.
Is there a?
No.
Okay.
There's nothing after that.
No.
Once I come to America, it's closed.
Case closed.
Yes.
We're done.
Everything has been resolved, okay?
Right. That's funny. There were other children who were in the street on Via Clelia
Yes.
with you. I have to assume that you have no idea.
Oh, I don't know if
What
they're alive or
became
dead.
of them?
I don't know if the people that I got to be intimate with
Right.
are alive or dead.
Right.
One person wrote to me, after
Really?
3 years, she wrote to me and she said, I still remember you very fondly. I was in love with you. And of course, I was not that attracted to her and at the time. And I said, I'm going to write to her a long letter explaining who I became, what happened to me in America. And then I think it was around one of the holidays. And then I said, well, after the holidays, I'll write to her. I'll be more eloquent after the holidays. And eventually, I waited and waited and waited and never replied. Which happens to us when we mean to write something that's poignant and from the heart, and then you as you wait too long, you write 2 sentences. Yes, I received your package. Thank you very much. It spoke to me. Blah, and that's it. And I didn't even do that.
Yeah. And the biggest character, the sort of central figure besides you for me in this was your mother, who's struggling through such an extraordinary time.
Yeah.
When did she pass?
Oh,
may I ask?
when she died?
Yeah, when did she die? I'm just curious.
She died about 10 years ago.
Okay.
But we were very close to her, and my father had already died, so she was living by herself in New York City. And I think my brother and I had made a point of visiting her every single day. We would basically say, I'll go today, but you'll go tomorrow. I'll go to the day after. And eventually we were both there all the time.
Do you ever wonder what she would have thought of a book like this?
Oh, well, when I wrote Out of Egypt and I had her and my father not getting along, she said to me, we fought a lot. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And my father, who was the philanderer by excellence, I said, Dad, I did say in this book, and I will say, that you cheated on Mom. Yeah, of course I cheated. Who could live with her? I mean, this is the kind of family I come from.
And it's all here. I know we want to get to some questions, and I think we're sort of at about that time. So if somebody has a question, if they could put their hand up, and I believe there's some microphones, is that correct?
I have a loud voice.
What's that?
I have a loud voice.
Oh, okay. Well, then shout away.
I love your style.
There you go. You get a microphone anyway.
Okay.
They come free.
When I read your books, I kind of see a movie.
Yes.
So when is the movie coming out, and who's playing the 16-year-old André?
I look forward. I hope he's going to be very handsome, very attractive, and quite sort of finished as a human being, as opposed to the gangly kind of person I was. But it sounds good, yes. But nobody has said anything yet, so.
There was somebody else's hand up, I believe, also.
This lady up there?
Sorry? Oh, we'll get to you in a second.
Salve. Ok, sono Giovanna.
Ciao.
Salve, Joanna.
Okay, so always in your books, you always talk about, discover the identity, the place, identities, and culture. But we know that you learn when you were in Egypt already. I don't know. You spoke. I don't know how many languages already. Arabic, French, etc. So because we know that language is a strong part of culture, you have something more compared to other people like us who just have a change of identity. You know, for you it's also a cultural change. It's, you know, that is linked to your knowledge of all these languages. What do you make of this? You know, I think that the struggle with this finding your own identity for you has been stronger because you spoke so many languages, and the link of that language have with different culture made this more complicated for you, I swear.
Well, thank you for the question, Giovanna. But it's a troubling thing because people think that you're given many languages. I was brought up with at least 4 languages, and I spoke some Greek, which I've totally forgotten, and some Arabic, which I can only speak in the streets now if I go or if I get into a cab and it's driven by an Egyptian person. But by and large, my 3 languages are Italian, French, and English. And ironically, I speak all 3 languages with the wrong accent. I speak French with an Italian accent, Italian with a French accent, and look at my English. I mean, it clearly is not a person born in America. So I have to deal with that. But more to the point is, what is my identity? Who am I? What am I? And I don't know that because I didn't grow up, thank God, it's a weird thing, because I don't believe in God, and I was not brought up to have any religion, and I'm very fortunate for that. But I also have a dissatisfaction with the idea of nationality. Like, what is your nationality? I don't have a nationality, and I don't care to have one. So that basically you compensate for everything. So what else are you? I don't know. What profession do you have? I've been a stockbroker, I've been in advertising, and I've been an academic. And I don't know which I did better. I know I was fired from my job as an advertiser, so I must have been bad, okay? But, and I was not exactly successful as a broker. So that was gone. So I am more or less condemned to being a professor. I'm a good professor. I think I'm a very good professor. At the same time, I'm also a writer who basically never says to people, I am a writer. No, I have a friend who says, I am a poet. Oh, come on, that's You're not a poet because I don't understand a word you're saying.
That's yeah. There was a woman in purple back there, I believe, had her hand up.
Buongiorno.
Hi.
I had a question about the whether it was an intentional decision or because the book was about your Roman year, why I never saw this boy's longing for Alexandria and speaking about friends there and food there and things, and I don't know if those feelings were superseded by the trauma, or it was a decision for another book. And
no, actually, there is a lot of Alexandria, missing Alexandria, or feeling out of place because the real place would have been, but never was, Alexandria. I always say that I long to leave Alexandria, even when I was in Alexandria. So I was never rooted there. And that's gone. But to give you a simple example of one thing that mattered to me is when my mother put out the tablecloth on the table for us to have dinner, I saw that the tablecloth had the same stain that it had in Egypt. And suddenly I felt, oh, this is nice. So things haven't changed that much.
Well, there's something about loss when it's you choose to leave it or whether it's taken away from you, which is very different. Yeah.
That is basically when you're kicked out.
Yeah, right.
You don't have a choice. It's
Right.
not something that you want to do. But
Right.
I was not kicked out of Rome to come to America. This was a decision I made, and I don't think it was a bad decision. I am surprised that my parents did it, that they came to America at a rather advanced age, and it was not exactly what they wanted out of life.
I think I saw another hand to your, I thought I saw a hand over there. There. Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Nicole Ranganathan. I came all the way from California, my first time in Charleston, and I want to thank you so much for your exquisite writings and your beautiful reflections today. So I'm a professor, so I have 3 nerdy questions.
Okay.
You can answer one or none of them. The first is I was wondering if your memoir writing was influenced at all by Edward Said, who also, wrote a very famous memoir, Out of Place, about, he also grew up in Egypt in part, and his was a very, influential memoir. The 2 second questions are more general, and I would find it extremely helpful if you would talk a little bit about what was like the creative urge that led you to write your first novel. And also if you'd be willing to talk at all about your writing process. I would be very grateful if you could answer any or all of these questions.
Well, the writing process is basically doing it all the time. There is no such thing as a process, to use that word. I wake up, if I like to have coffee in the morning, and if I have nothing else to do, I'll start writing. That's what I like to do. Of course, there's all kinds of interruptions because I need to work, I have a job, etc. But by and large, I'm always writing. So that's why the only way I can read a novel is by listening to it, which is why I love his work.
Thank you.
Because that's the only, otherwise I'm at my computer and I don't want to be interrupted. So that's my process, basically. It's all day long. And I can sit in my hovel. I go biking twice a day. That's a known fact. Everybody knows. André goes out biking for 6 miles every time, twice a day. And that's all I do, and I listen to. Now, as far as Edward Said is concerned, I knew Edward quite well because he was also a professor, my professor, when he came to Harvard, and he taught a seminar there. We became extremely close, and you would be surprised at how good his imitation was of people who come from India and try to speak English, and how people who come from the Middle East try to speak English. He was sort of phenomenal as an imitator. So he had the gift of what is it? The pantomime. He could do it he could do anything he wanted, and he was also a world-class pianist. On the other hand, he was also a polemicist, and he likes polemics, and he thrived on polemics. And essentially, his book came after my book. So I was not influenced by his book. He was probably influenced by mine. And mine is a far better book. Because
That goes without saying.
no, but his book was basically, there was one confession he made, and everybody quotes that confession. And you don't really know if he's really Egyptian. He lived in Egypt. He was born in Egypt, I think. But is he really Palestinian? How far back does his Palestinian roots go? So you don't know that, and he's been accused of various things. So Edward and I, we never parted company, but I had asked him to blurb my book, and he couldn't do that because he had blurbed somebody else's book, which is fine. But anyway, so and I forget what the middle section was.
There was a second question. I don't remember it either.
What was your creative urge to write?
Oh, yes. Why write?
Why did I write a memoir?
No. Why write your first book, I think was the question. Your first novel.
My first novel. Well, because novels were in my blood. I mean, I always wanted to write novels. I was writing one novel that was quite intense, and I had to put it aside for a while. And in the moment that I put it aside, it was the beginning of summer, and I said, I can't do this. This is way too complicated. So I wrote another book that took about 3 months and a half, and that was Call Me By Your Name. And then I put it aside and I went back to my other novel, thinking that this is what I was seriously involved in. It turned out that the book that I had neglected or didn't take seriously was the one that made me sort of world famous.
There's a question here, I believe. Yes. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more. So,
Thank you very much for your talk today, and the interviewer is also very interesting.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes.
Great questions. For those of us who've considered the idea of writing a memoir ourselves, one of the things I struggled with personally is who would be interested in my story? And I wondered, as you shifted from novel to memoir, you probably, obviously, your story is much more interesting than mine, but the point is, you
Nope.
probably, how did you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to take that leap and I'm going to trust that people are going to find my story interesting or, whatever.
I don't think that writing a story about one's life needs to be interesting but in and of itself. I think that's a bad way. Who would be interested in my story? Who would be interested in mine? I mean, what? A guy goes to Rome and basically trundles in the streets and doesn't like it and then leaves? There's nothing interesting in that. So what I do believe, however, is that a good memoir has, in my case, and maybe only in my case, it needs to have a certain what you might call voice. It has to have a voice that is partly irony, in my case, has worked well. In irony being what? A combination of lyricism and its opposite, which is humor. And so if I can combine those two, then you can get a character like Uncle Claude or like Aunt Flora or whatever. Those are characters in my book. Or Uncle Willy in Out of Egypt. You get those characters because they're a combination of everything. As long as you can combine the reason for writing the book, which is basically you miss this, but at the same time you have to make fun of it, otherwise nobody's going to take you seriously. And more to the point, you need to have attitude, because attitude defines the work. And I use the word attitude as in he has attitude, not he has a good attitude. He has attitude. You have to have attitude. In other words, which is also a form of irony. So you're constantly battling things on two fronts. In my case, it worked because I am an undecided person by definition. Some people are far more decided. The one kind of thing that I used to get all the time, and they would send me the whole manuscript thinking that I would blurb it, is basically people writing about the Holocaust. And I understand, people have horrible stories about the Holocaust, but it's not good writing. And so you end up having the same story being told again and again and again. It's as if they went to an MFA program for how to write a Holocaust tale. And it just doesn't work. You need to have attitude, you need to have irony, you need to have all these other things so that you have a voice that is coherent in and of itself and yet at the same time easily disemboweled.
I think we have time for one more question.
Sorry, I went on for too long.
No, please. If there is one last question, otherwise, wait, is there somebody?
No, this is just the mic.
I can't. Is there? Oh, in the balcony. Sorry. Yes, please.
Were you engaged in writing the screenplay?
I was involved in only one scene. And then I said, I'm going to tell you what I think, and if you want to ignore me, fine. But I got involved in one scene only. And that was actually, they listened to me. And actually, by then it was only the one director, not two. And he was involved and he basically said, yes, you're totally right.
I thought you were going to say they promptly ignored you, which would have been the Hollywood sort of way to do it.
They should have ignored me, but in that case, I was right and I knew I was right. What was the scene? Okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
I mean,
very, very quickly, you'll tell us the one scene.
Fine. Essentially, there's a scene where the parents are talking to each other. And they're saying, do you think something is going on between Elio and Oliver?
Oh, right.
And they say, I don't know. And she says, you know, there's this new disease creeping into the gay community. I'm just aware of that. And I'm saying, no, absolutely no conversation. The father must not even suggest he knows. And the son certainly must not think he knows anything. until the moment the father and son have their sort of revelatory conversation, where the father says, no, 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 you had a great friendship, I know, but you probably had more than just a good friendship. And that is what I wanted the scene to have. In other words, the revelation has to come at the right moment, not before.
Well, I think we are out of time. I think, Diana, did you want to come out? But in the meantime, the book is Romanier. This is André Aciman.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Andre and Edoardo. I know you're a combination from the point of view of Andre writing the books. This isn't the first one that you've read, Edoardo, and it's been a privilege to listen to both of you together. Thank you all so much for being such a receptive audience. Thank you, Lee Bell and Foetus Pantasis, for supporting this session. We so appreciate our donors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eduardo's reading of the memoir and the written work, the novel on which it's based. I can hear from the questions, a lot of you have read the book already, but if you haven't, now's your opportunity to buy it here from our booksellers, Buxton Books, and to have it personalised. So this is some advice from Buxton Books as to how to reach the bookstore as quickly as you can. They're the official bookseller of the festival. As you know, and as I've already said, Andre will be personalising books if you'd like him to. And the best way to reach the bookstall, if you can, is to exit the theatre through the back doors, walk through the courtyard, and get to the signing table. And there'll also be signed books available in the lobby. But if any of you get lost, there are plenty of staff here from the festival team, from Dock Street, from Buxton Books. We'll lead you there. So can we have one more thank you to Andre and Eduardo?
Thank you. Thank you.